êtes tous ici. Thank you so much for being here for my senior recital. This recital means the world to me, and I'm so grateful to be able to share it with you that are here, as well as people that are joining through Zoom. This recital is a culmination of all of my 4 years here at Utah State University in my 2 degrees, one in French and the other in music, a BA in music. I first learned French when I served a mission for my church in France about 4 years ago. And when I lived there, I absolutely fell in love with the country and the people and the language, and it just means the world to me. But I'm just, subsequently, this recital means the world to me. It's my 2 favorite things kind of meshed together in one, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity. Tonight, we will be discussing Claude Debussy au fil des années, meaning Claude Debussy throughout the years. Debussy is a French national icon. He has been a standard of French pride and French culture for many years. Tonight, we'll be looking at a few of the vocal pieces that he has composed at different times throughout his career, which lasted roughly 30 years and resulted in over 200 works, which are wonderful. Debussy was part of the first generation of modernist composers. The modernist movement was a movement when composers were trying to reinterpret familiar and widely accepted musical norms in new and exciting ways. Debussy was well known for pushing the envelope and following kind of his own rules rather than a lot of the ones that maybe were more typical and things like that. Throughout his career, he developed his own personal musical language beyond what was typical in the preceding years. He drew upon many compositional influences, including Wagnerian harmonies, which he later tried to move beyond to highlight his own French nationality, because Wagner was typically German. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. He also drew on inspiration from Russian and Hungarian composers, as well as music from Asia and the Middle East, as well as post-tonality and ideas like that. Like I said previously, these influences all helped him derive his own musical voice, which became recognized as utterly French. I personally believe that this is the case because of the deep pride that Debussy himself had for his nation and for his heritage. Despite there being examples of exoticism, or maybe because of exoticism in his music, exoticism meaning that he borrows harmonies as well as modes and stories and sounds from other nations that are outside of French, what we typically categorize as French music. He still puts his own French twists on all of his work. I kind of relate this to when you go to McDonald's in Paris. You can find a cheeseburger royal, but also you can find a croque monsieur, which is very typically French. So even if you're in an American store, there are things that maintain that French culture. And I believe that that's what Debussy did with his music, is he took something and really made it his own. As we continue throughout tonight, we will be discussing the history of Debussy's life and his career, and also taking a look at these different pieces that I will be performing. Since this is a lecture recital, I will be speaking in between each of the pieces, introducing them, introducing characteristics about them that I feel are important for you to know as an audience, and things that I have loved to discover in researching this man and his career. I'll begin by just a little bit of a short introduction of him. So Debussy has received great praise for his works. He was called the most important composer of his time by Schoenberg, as well as Dieu-Bussy by Satie, which is a literal combination of the word Dieu, which means God in French, and then Debussy's surname, which, I mean, is probably a little bit of an overstatement, but it's incredible, and to each his own. Debussy was first born to a family in the lower class in 1862. Because of the Franco-Prussian War, he moved with his aunt, who was actually the first one to enroll him in piano lessons. And he showed great musical talent from a very young age. And at just 10 years old, he was admitted to the Conservatoire de Paris, where he studied piano and then continued on to later study composition, as well as the musical basics and things like that. However talented Debussy was, he had a rather casual look on some of his class attendance, as well as he didn't perform super well in a couple of competitions, and often lacked some diligence in his schoolwork that his teachers would have preferred. So he was asked to no longer continue in the program of the piano at the Conservatoire, but he continued through doing composition. So while this was happening, it was around this time in 1879 that we have some of Debussy's first published works. The first work that I will be performing tonight comes from around this time period. It is entitled Beau Soir, and the piece is dated 1880, which at this time Debussy was just 18 years old, so he was still fairly young. This beautiful, flowing, reflective piece is the setting of a poem by Paul Bourget. The piece begins by describing the sun setting, casting a red, causing the river to reflect a bright pink. And I guess it says, lorsqu'au soleil couchant, les rivières sont roses. It then continues to paint a picture of a breeze flowing through a wheat field by saying, Cantier de frissons courent sur les champs de blé. After this opening, which paints a beautiful picture of this scene that we're standing in, we are then told that there's an invitation that comes from everything around us that invites us to remember the beauties of the world, as well as to enjoy life because it is fleeting. Towards the end of this song, it states that rivers continue onward to the sea, and we as humans go to the grave. And I think that that's a very meaningful piece of poetry, and the way that Debussy has created the music to go along with this really shows his young yet important and meaningful regard for life. So as I perform this lovely piece, one of the things that I would invite you to do is to follow along on the program, which has the text and translations, which will help help paint this picture for you. And I hope you enjoy this song. is entitled Mandoline. This piece was written in 1882 when Debussy was again still very young. This song was one of the many that was dedicated to Debussy's first love, Marie Blanche Vassigny. He met this woman when he was working and accompanying at a voice studio, actually. It was later published as part of the Vassigny songbook, but it was not initially intended to be part of this songbook. That was done after, when they compiled all of the works that he wrote in admiration for this woman. This poem, specifically, is found in a 22-piece anthology by Paul Verlaine entitled Fête Galante. This was published in 1886. This poem was written by Verlaine after finding inspiration from a painting by Jean-Antoine Watteau. He painted a series of paintings that were all about the stock characters in the Italian comedy called Commedie dell'arte. These characters are Tercis, Amante, Clitandre, et Damis. So he painted these paintings of these characters that everybody knows at this point in time, singing and entertaining women under, on a beautiful day under some trees. And this poem paints that very beautifully for us. It's a narrative poem, meaning that it is written to tell a story. It's written for us to experience this along with these characters. Debussy created a song cycle that is also entitled Fête Galante. It has 6 poems from Verlaine's anthology. This Mandoline was thought to be included in the first book when it was first published, but since has been removed, and like I said, published individually as well as in the songbook for Madame Vassigny. The accompaniment that's written by Debussy is equally joyful and triumphant as well as casual in this really fun, light melody, so as to paint this picture for us. And I hope that as you read along and we experience it together, we can feel that light, airy, fun experience that Debussy, I'm sure, would want all of us to have. Debussy grew, he supported himself as he continued through the Conservatoire with summer jobs teaching, like I mentioned, at voice studios, as well as accompanying and things like that. Teaching piano and accompanying at voice studios, excuse me. For multiple summers, he was hired by Tchaikovsky Chmielewski's patron, and with this family, he actually was in charge of teaching the children to have duets with their mother. And through this employment, he was able to travel throughout Russia, Italy, Switzerland, and France, which greatly influenced his composition at this time in his life. Right now, where he is, the total of his completed works rose to about 30 at this time, so he was really working and composing quite a bit. Drawing on his further exposure to music from different parts of the world, he found all of this inspiration and again started composing more. The next song I will be performing is entitled Recitaire de Léa. This song is an example of exoticism. Through Debussy's commitment and love for exotic markers, at this point it does not all the way come to fruition. That will happen later, around the 1900s. But this piece is a great example of the early stages of Debussy's wanting to incorporate somewhat of the exotic into his music. There's a collection of music which is categorized within the French exotic tradition, which is called biblical exoticism. And this piece fits perfectly into that category. So he wrote a cantata called L'Enfant Prodigue. It is based off of the biblical story of the prodigal son. In the biblical story found in Luke 15, we find that it's about the father and the relationship with his son. One leaves and then comes back and is accepted wholeheartedly. In this piece, we are introduced to the side of the mother and the mother's anguish as her son has left. In this cantata, it is set where the Bible is set in the Middle East. And so it was an example of exoticism. The names of the characters in this cantata are Leah, derived from the Hebrew, which is Leah, which is found in the Bible. We also encounter the name of the prodigal son, which is Azael, which is also rooted in Hebrew. As something to look for, just to point out an exact example of exoticism in this piece, I'm going to have our wonderful Dallas Heaton, who's our collaborative pianist for the night, play a chord cluster that is found in this piece that really highlights the feeling of what the French would call l'Orient, meaning the East, the Orient, which was very mysterious and exotic at that time. So this is a chord that will highlight that idea. Thank you very much. So this cantata was written by Debussy for the purpose of a competition. In 1883, Debussy was the runner-up for a prestigious prize called the Prix de Rome, which was a scholarship from the state for students of the arts. This scholarship it included a residency at the Villa Medici, which is the French Academy in Rome. The winner of this prize would be paid for by the state to go down there, be supported, and then continue to further their studies while surrounded by the beautiful things that were happening in Italy. He submitted in 1883, but he did not win. Despite that, he resubmitted L'Enfant Prodigue, which is the cantata about the prodigal son. He resubmitted that in 1884, and he actually won with 22 out of 28 votes. So it was very, very well loved, and it's one of my favorite pieces of tonight as well. Like I said previously, this story really highlights a mother's love for her children, and it starts out and she begins by mourning that her son is not with her. She speaks to the fact that her heart, remembers his image and can see him, but he's so far that she can't, protect him or have him here next to her. She also mourns how different their life was when he was here, as well as all of the other things that other people are feeling. They're not feeling this sadness because their children didn't leave. So it's really her expressing all of the deepest feelings that she's feeling. She will, at the end, or multiple times throughout the song, she calls out his name, Azael, and then asks a heartbreaking question of Pourquoi m'as-tu quitté, which means why did you leave me? So listen for both the exotic influences within this song, as well as follow the translations to be able to better understand the grief of this mother. Well, the next song that I will be performing before intermission is one of the two songs in the song cycle Deux Romances. This song cycle is a setting of two poems by Paul Bourget. The words to Romance are a lyric poem about lost love. A lyric poem is where, instead of a narrative poem, which we saw a little bit earlier with Mandoline, which tells us a story, a lyric poem is one where, instead of a specific narration, there are personal emotions, feelings that are given in the first person, but it is essentially to evoke a feeling within the listener and performer. This poem is chosen by Debussy, and it highlights the senses of the listener by incorporating words that purposely evoke our five senses. For example, there is the word douce, which can mean soft to the touch or the feel. It can also mean something that tastes sweet and rich. The poet also uses the word odorant, meaning an odor, something that you can smell. So there's that. He also uses parfum, which in France, if you were to go to a ice cream store and they ask you what flavor you would like, they'd say, quel parfum est-ce que tu veux? And that is because the word parfum means both a smell as well as a flavor. So this is a technique that is used very often with French poets in order to get the listener or the reader to really engage with this text. It is to invoke a feeling within every one of your senses, not simply hearing or reading and just experiencing in one dimension. So that's something that's really powerful about this piece. I think also Debussy picked that for a reason, because his accompaniment for this piece highlights those words very beautifully. There is a flowing nature to this piece which really helps engage all of our senses as a listener. So look for those things as we perform this piece. of all, I would love to apologize. You can look at one page 100 times and never quite see the mistake. That's very, very blatant. So I apologize, got a little bit caught up in the emotions of Azael, but I appreciate your patience with me. Thank you. All right. The next piece that I would like to discuss with you today is called Recueillement. It is from Claude Debussy's collection Cinq Poèmes de Baudelaire. So we'll begin that discussion. After studying in Rome from 1885 to 1887, Debussy returned home to Paris. It was at this point in his life when he was most influenced by Wagner. Richard Wagner, for those of you who don't know, was a great German composer of opera. His works were some of the most popular and admired of the time. He made incredibly popular innovations to opera as a style, as well as groundbreaking innovations in the role of music in drama, as well as harmonies and all of those things. So while his innovations were groundbreaking and new and wonderful, and everyone was very excited about them, his music quickly became a pillar of German pride, with even the Nazi party promoting Wagner's music as a standard for what German culture should be, the best of German culture. This fact is what caused Debussy to later question his loyalty to these ideas and his desire to continue to implement them. But at this point in his life, he was obsessed with Wagner. He loved all that he was doing. He would even visit his hometown and go to the festivals that they had there full of all of Wagner's music. So for a few years, Debussy implemented many of Wagner's ideas into his own works. Recueillement, that I will be singing in just a few minutes, is an example of him doing that. One of the things that Wagner is best known for is his innovation within harmony. Wagner is well known for chromatic harmonies with little or very unexpected resolution, or no resolution. In this piece, he shows his own experimentation with these same ideas of chromatic harmonies with no resolution, as well as just creating this unsettling feeling, which comes from this lack of resolution. I'm going to ask Dallas to play a couple of the chords at the introduction, which really give you this feeling of this unsettled feeling, which never resolve, which actually just move to another unsettling place. So that will give you kind of an idea of what to look out for in this piece, specifically to see how Debussy included Wagner's ideas within this piece. Thank you. So as you can see, it begins, and instead of settling or resolving anyway, it just moves slightly. So that's something that's very typical of Wagner, and really highlights how Debussy just thought that was the new and cool thing. So like I said, this song is from a collection called Cinq Poèmes de Baudelaire. This collection is 5 works from Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal. Much like the well-known Edgar Allan Poe, the French poet Charles Baudelaire is very well known for his gothic, dark topics that he handles in a lot of his poems. Les Fleurs du Mal is specifically one of those things that highlights kind of finding beauty within darkness. And this piece really, through the Wagnerian style, creates that unsettling feeling. The poem itself is directed specifically at the speaker's own sadness, and continues to talk about death and finding beauty within the darkness in the world. So there is a beauty to this piece, however, it does have that unsettling feeling. So make sure to watch out for that and enjoy. Whether you are a musicologist or not, this next piece will most likely sound familiar to you, the title, at least, of this piece. Although it is not the popular piano suite that many people are familiar with, I will be performing Debussy's second version of Clair de Lune for voice. This piece was written in 1891. At this point in Debussy's career was a great time of discovery. He was late in his 20s, early 30s, and was struggling financially and was yet to receive much recognition. At this time, he spent a really good amount of time with artists and poets in the quintessential French cafe that you can imagine. They would discuss the new and upcoming things, and he also gained a lot of inspiration at this point in his career from the Symbolist movement. This movement was a literary and artistic movement focused specifically around a sense of detached observation. This detached observation was achieved through evoking a mood or a feeling or an atmosphere or a scene, rather than the expression of a deeply felt emotion or a narrative storytelling. In Clair de Lune, this is attained by presenting the subject matter, but withholding more explanation. We can see how this piece relates to the Symbolist movement in the Symbolist Manifesto, or Manifeste du Symbolisme, written by Jean Mauriac in 1886. This manifesto perfectly kind of explains the goal of the Symbolist movement, as well as it explains the out with the old and in with the new kind of feeling that a lot of artists were having at this time. Jean Mauriac wrote, Romanticisme, après avoir eu ses jours de gloire et de bataille, perdit sa force et de sa grâce. Which translates to Romanticism, after having its day of glory and having fought its battles, it has lost its strength as well as its grace. He then continues, une nouvelle manifestation d'art était donc attendue, nécessaire et inévitable, which translates to a new manifestation of art then became expected, necessary, and inevitable. He continues to explain this movement by saying, poésie symbolique cherche à vêtir l'idée d'une forme sensible qui, néanmoins, ne serait pas son à elle-même, mais qui, tout en servant à exprimer l'idée. That's kind of a lot, but we'll translate. This roughly translates to, it's written by a poet, so it's very flowery, as French poets love to do, but it translates to symbolist poetry tries to address an idea in a sensitive form, which is not its sole purpose, but it is also to remain subjective about the idea itself. So this is really an invitation for further examination by you, the audience. So whatever story is being told, it is open for you. It's subjective. It's, here's this, decide what it means to you. And that's one thing that's really cool about this symbolist movement, and I'm sure why Debussy felt such a connection to it. In Clair de Lune, the text is full of contradictions that seem to exist to be questioned. For example, it discusses, they're playing their flutes happily, but then it talks about how they're actually doing it sadly. So it's very contradictory and invites a lot of self-understanding of this piece. While this melody is very straightforward, as to be expected, through a symbolist piece, the invitation to think deeper and dig deeper and discover the idea that is being presented to us. And that's what I encourage you to do today as we listen to this piece. performing La Flûte de Pan from Debussy's Trois Chansons de Bijoutier, based on collections of poems called Les Chansons de Bijoutier, written by Pierre Louys. The song cycle was written in 1897 to 1898. As Debussy continues to grow as a composer, we continue to see his innovation. In this piece, Debussy uses a modal scale, which adds a sense of exoticism, again, like we talked about a little earlier, which is both intriguing as well as beautiful. One of my personal favorite things about this piece is the storytelling that is achieved through the musical accompaniment. For example, there is a portion of text which reads Nos chansons veulent se répondre et tour à tour nos bouches s'unissent sur la flûte, which translates to our songs try to answer each other, and our mouths join in turn on the flute. After this phrase is sung, there is a repetition of the same small motif on the piano, higher and lower, which perfectly describes two voices coming together on this flute, and I think it's really, really beautiful. Similarly, after the phrase Voici les chants de Grunier verte qui commencent avec la nuit, meaning here's the song of the green frogs that begin with the night. After that, the piano imitates the song of a frog, and we'll repeat that 2 times. So these are some things to look out for as I perform this piece. And this piece really is different than a lot of the other pieces that he composed, because it is very much a narrative poem where a story is being described. However, it does also include the symbolist movement, because what is being said is not necessarily exactly what is going on. These Chansons de Bijoutier is a collection of poems that Pierre Louys claimed to have translated from an ancient Greek text from a poetess many, many years before Christ, who wrote these poems. However, that was then proved to be false. So it's definitely all part of the symbolist movement, where what is being said is not necessarily exactly maybe what is behind the scenes. So those are a couple of things to keep an eye out for as we perform this piece. Pour les jours d'Isias Satis, il m'a donné une syrah faite de roseaux bien taillés, une mise avec la blanche cire qui est tous à mes lèvres comme le miel. Il me prend à jouer assise sur ses genoux, mais je suis un peu tremblante. Il en joue après moi si doucement que je l'entends à peine. Nous n'avons rien à nous dire, tant nous sommes pris l'un de l'autre, et nos chansons veulent se répandre, et tour à tour nos bouches s'unissent sur la flûte. Il est tard. Voici les chants de Grunier verte qui commencent avec la comes to a close, I will be ending by singing the last vocal piece that was ever published by Debussy. He died early in 1918, and this song was composed in 1915, so just a couple years before he died from cancer. In stark contrast to the sensuality of many of the pieces that we've looked at up to this point, this piece was written as a political statement against the atrocities in World War I. At this time of the First World War, Debussy was seen as a national icon whose music was used in a sense to promote French nationalism. This piece, Noël des enfants qui n'ont plus de maison, which translates to Christmas of the children who no longer have any houses, which is quite heartbreaking. This song is written from the voice of a child who is affected by the world's events. It is essentially a prayer with lyrics and music, both written by Debussy, which is the first time we've seen this in our journey tonight. But this piece was written as a plea to the Lord from the children of France at this time for victory as well as vengeance on the behalf of their beloved nation. So it is very powerful, and I hope that you enjoy this piece as well. Nous n'avons plus de maison. Les ennemis ont tout pris, jusqu'à notre petit lit. Ils ont brûlé les collègues de notre maître aussi. Ils ont brûlé les cuisines de Monsieur Jésus-Christ. Ils ont vu pauvre qui n'a pas pu s'en aller. Nous n'avons plus de maison. Les ennemis ont tout pris, jusqu'à notre petit lit. Bien sûr, papa est à la guerre, pauvre maman est morte. Avant d'avoir vu tout ça, qu'est-ce que l'on va faire? Noël, petit Noël, n'allez pas chez eux, n'allez pas jamais chez eux, Debussy. Vengez les enfants de France, les petits Belges, les petits Serbes et les petits Polonais aussi. Si nous en aimons, pardonnez-le, Noël, surtout, pas toujours, tâchez de nous donner le pain quotidien. Nous n'avons plus de maison. Les ennemis ont tout pris, jusqu'à notre petit lit. Ils ont brûlé l'école et notre maître aussi. Ils ont brûlé les cuisines de Monsieur Jésus-Christ. Ils ont vu pauvre qui n'a pas pu s'en aller. Noël, écoutez-nous. Nous n'avons plus tout petit sabbat. Et donnez la victoire aux enfants de France. Thank you all very much for taking this journey with me, for listening to me as I discovered and learned about an artist who I respect so very much from a country that I love dearly. I really appreciate the time I've spent here at Utah State University, and I appreciate you being here for my final recital.